Did you catch that Toronto Raptors Cleveland Cavaliers game the other night, though? I forgot to mention. Did you catch that one?
Who are they?
I'm not familiar. What is this? Is this a sport you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. Is this sports?
Yeah. We're doing more sports chat. The thing that our listeners love. They crave it. My man OG Anunoby locked down Donovan
Baseball?
Mitchell. Locked him down. Was very entertaining.
Not familiar.
Really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Get it out of your system.
Yeah.
That's like, I think the Raptors are just like Cleveland's like Achilles heel this season.
Yeah. Well, they're long boys.
Yeah, they are.
They're all long
boys up there in Toronto.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Drake just didn't get those long jeans.
Nope.
He's
no,
round
he did
Drake.
not.
Speaking of,
he has more of a long face because of his sad lyrics.
Oh, in which our listeners apparently know, because listen to this. Spotify Wrapped came out today. Everyone gets to see what they listen to. Their top artists of the year and all this stuff. And then on our end, we get like a wrap for you all. And I was in there today poking around at our listener interests. Like your podcast listeners also listen to this. And it gave me like the top 5 artists for people who listen to this show. Number 1 was Drake.
Okay.
And a lot of Drake heads who listen to this show.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing?
That must be the Canadian contingent that I'm bringing to the table.
I mean, maybe, but like most of our, not surprisingly, most of our listeners are in the US. Yeah. I'd say about like 16% of our listeners are in Canada. But like the most listened to artist was Drake. I thought that was very funny. Can you guess what the second most listened to artist was?
The second most listened to artist is Fall Out Boy.
No.
I really don't know. I'm not sure.
Taylor Swift.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then
we got what is the name for the fandom? The Taylor Swift fandom?
I guess.
The Swifties? We got some Swifties that listen to this program?
It could, yeah. And this is like all time. It's not just like the last like week or 2 weeks where we did have the episode that kind of talked about her. Like this is all time. All time listens. It's Drake, Taylor Swift, then Kendrick Lamar. And now here, Rob, we have to cancel our audience. Are you ready? 4th most listened to artist by Insurgents listeners. Known rabid anti-Semite Kanye West.
Oh shit! Oh my
you
goodness.
all are canceled. If you're listening to the show, consider yourself canceled.
Not the paid interns. You are not canceled.
You can stay.
You get special privileges.
You could listen to Kanye West. You can listen to Louis Farrakhan speeches. Whatever you want.
And in fact, we encourage you to listen to Louis Farrakhan.
No. Let's
big proponent personally of okay. Yeah.
And then Radiohead, which is just like out of left field for the other listeners. They're good, but just like Drake, Kendrick Lamar, Kanye West, Taylor Swift, Radiohead.
The whole Kanye West arc is just so fucking grim. Like he's like the one of the biggest music stars on the planet. All the wealthy A-list celeb friends, and now he's just like hanging out in like the suburbs, some shitty strip mall with Nick Fuentes, and it's just like what happened? You were the most divorced person I've ever seen in my life. It is absolutely absurd.
Yeah, it's pathetic.
Very depressing.
It's really pathetic. Other fun insights: we have 2 listeners in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So
that's MBS. He's one of our he's probably because he's on the board. MBS is on the board, so he's listening to the.
Yeah, right. He's an investor. We have 1 listener in Algeria, 1 listener in Egypt. So please tweet us selfies. What's up? We want to meet our listeners, but I really think it would be hilarious if the 2 people in Saudi Arabia linked in build.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun to poke around some of the data. We have a really not surprising. Australians are like U.S. politics freaks. That's like our fifth most biggest listenership in the world. But it's cool. U.S., Canada, UK, Germany, Australia. This data is like so interesting.
Yeah, Australia is just like warm Canada, anyways.
It kind of is.
Yeah. It's like Canada with koala bears or whatever they got down there. All kinds of weird critters.
Yeah.
I don't know.
210 listeners in Iceland. If you are there, can I come stay with you? I want to visit. That's
Iceland.
Nice. Lots of interesting data here, but I just thought I was looking at the artists like Drake and then Taylor Swift. It's like that's great. I love it.
Yeah. I don't use Spotify, so I didn't get a Spotify Wrapped. I use YouTube Music. I haven't gotten. They do like an annual rundown or whatever, so I haven't gotten that yet. I know it's just going to be Steely Dan though. It's for the second year running.
Mine sucks because I use a royalty-free playlist on Spotify when I do my TYT shows.
Oh, okay.
I have it running in the background all the time, so I'm just like cranking up the hours for this artist that I never otherwise listen to, and that's always my top artist.
Okay, yeah.
My second most listened to was Counterparts, which
all right.
I really love the new album, and I listened to that a lot. And then Mastodon, which I just like really got into one of their albums this year, Beyond Crack the Sky. I was listening to them a lot like a couple months ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't gotten mine yet. I'm sure the top one is Steely Dan. Probably my number 2 is most likely Donald Fagen, who's actually the singer of Steely Dan, his solo work. There'll probably be maybe some Michael McDonald on there. I was all yacht rock this year.
That's cool, really, man. Keeping it breezy.
Yeah, absolutely. I was keeping it breezy, as I am wont to do.
Oh man.
Yeah, you want to plug our coming conversation here? We got the most pro-labor president in history doing some really pro-labor stuff right now, and we were able to talk about it, have a good conversation about that today.
That's right. Matthew Cunningham-Cook of The Lever joins us on today's episode. He has been covering the railroad workers and their push for a better contract. Now we have congressional involvement and White House involvement that might just, create a contract for them without their input or ratification, which is totally bullshit. We get into all the ways that sucks, how their requests are modest, how, quote, good billionaires like Warren Buffett are involved in this and are profiteering off of their work, record profits, unsurprising, just like so many other industries. And, what this means for labor relations in this country overall. So great conversation with Matthew. Definitely want to stay tuned for that. Before we get into that, another ask that people head on over to theinsurgents.substack.com and become a subscriber. You get access to all of our paid episodes. We're now doing one a week in addition to our weekly free episode. You get access to the full back catalog, officially become a paid intern of the Insurgents, and you support the show, which helps keep it sustainable. We really love doing it for you all. Sorry, we just had to cancel you for your music taste. A lot of you are listening to Kanye. Got to fix that. There's a
way to uncancel yourself, though, as we mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. General amnesty.
Yeah, we did talk about this earlier this week in the last bonus episodes, though. And Jordan, that how pro labor I am and how much I support unions. Unfortunately, though, some of the paid interns of this program are attempting to unionize. I'm not into that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's going to disrupt the family atmosphere we have in the Insurgents podcast and the Insurgents LLC. So as much as I am pro-labor, pro-union, I do not support that. But still, I do encourage all our listeners to become paid interns of the program. Anyways, you don't need a union when you're a paid intern of the Insurgents. We make sure that you're all taken care of. We want to get the content directly to you without any kind of middleman, So I'm very pro-labor, very pro-union, maybe just not in that case. It would be very disruptive to the Insurgents economy if we were to do that.
Like we were saying on the last episode, we just really value our direct communication we have with our listeners. And if the listeners unionize, it creates an unnecessary middleman.
Yeah.
And again,
that bit was too good. I had to do it again for the people that didn't get to hear it. Yeah.
If you're on the fence, don't worry. We have an 8-hour mandatory training that you have to go to hear about why that would be bad for us, the insurgents' family.
Yeah, you show one of those cheesy videos like, someone handed me a union card and they said I had to sign it. I thought I had a choice, but I was forced to join this union. The Insurgents podcast listeners, I want to have a choice about these things, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God. So psycho. But no, Matthew has been doing great work on railroad unions and their fight for a better contract, which is totally deserved. These people make America run, so we need to treat them well, pay them fairly, and hear their demands when they want modest things like paid sick time. When you're working just brutal jobs, that's just, bare minimum you can do. These companies are lucky they're not asking for a lot more.
It's not like we're not still in a global pandemic either that would maybe be affecting people, making people more sick,
Yes. So Matthew's got some great reporting over on The Lever. Check that out and stay tuned for that conversation. It's fantastic.
And did you just want to mention this Georgia runoff before we got to Matthew?
Definitely, yeah. If you are in Georgia, make sure you go out and vote. If you know anyone in Georgia, make sure you get them to vote. This race is going to be extremely close, and I can't think of a worse outcome after all our frustrations over the past 2 years and really mitigating the damage Republicans could have done in an election that really should have gone their way, is giving them a 50-50 tie in the Senate. That would suck. A lot of it also affects how the Senate operates, the committee structure, and the balances in committees. That would affect judicial nominations and appointments, which these are some of the things that Biden's going to have to rely on without a Democratic House. So, some of the things that have happened over the past couple of years are generally good. We've never said it's perfect or great or utopian or anything like that. You all know we have offered our fair share of criticism, but we're also seeing the consequences of Democrats ignoring the judicial branch for the past few decades, while Republicans have made that a key part of their strategy. Well, this is an opportunity for Democrats to confirm a bunch of judges to counter that Republican balance. Within packing the courts, it's not just the Supreme Court, but within the broader packing the courts concept is appointing judges to federal benches. This is something they're going to be able to do that they hadn't been able to do to a much greater extent over the past 2 years because of that tie. Literally just helping Warnock win changes their ability to nominate judges, which is something that'll help preserve some of these things some of these gains that they did make over the past 2 years, and we hope are made over the next couple decades. So definitely get out there and vote if you live in Georgia, or if you know anyone in Georgia. Make sure you get your friends and family out to vote. And if you have a couple bucks to spare, head on over to 51seats.com to make a donation to 4 grassroots groups with very, very small budgets, but who are doing absolutely critical work in the field to get out the vote. That's where the race is going to come down. It's in the field work. 51seats.com.
Great. So let's get to our conversation with Matthew Cunningham-Cook of Lever News. Again, it was a really good one, and Matthew's going to be joining the program right after this. Now, Jordan, you had mentioned something about small talk. Did you have any kind of ideas for where you wanted to go with that, or was that just kind of
did either of you watch the U.S.-Iran game yesterday?
I didn't watch it, no.
I did not. I heard Tunisia beat France today, which is, pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So.
Well, France
Jordan's a Francophile, so he's not happy about this.
Yeah, this is my team. But
okay.
They didn't start Giroud and Mbappe. They didn't those. They sat until Giroud didn't even play at all, I don't think. They were resting. They already qualified for the next round. So this was an easy game for them. It was like the B squad. So it's not that big of a deal. I don't know if Tunisia will advance. I don't think Tunisia even advances because Australia beat Denmark. So I think they needed the win, but I don't think they even advance.
Yeah, the World Cup structure is very complicated to me. I'm like, the NCAA seems much easier to comprehend by comparison.
Yeah. It's basically like a point system in this first round, and then however many points you get determine your placement in the single elimination round of 16, and then it goes from there. But the U.S. will now play Netherlands, I believe, this Saturday. That's going to be a tough one. Netherlands is really good.
Yeah, notoriously very strong teams there, right? Yeah.
I think that's where the U.S. gets eliminated. Like, they're decent, but I don't know. They really seem to have structured this entire team around Pulisic, and I mean, he's their only goal scorer. Seems to be like the central point of attack, which is good, but you really need to like spread it out. Like, he can't. Like, if they just shut him down, what's your strategy? So we will see. Maybe I'm wrong. He also took a pretty hard shot in the abdomen went on his goal, like the only goal in the game against Iran yesterday, that hospitalized him temporarily. So we will see. But it was interesting, and I was just really, I had mentioned before, I was really worried about like the rhetoric around the game just because of U.S. relations or lack thereof with Iran, and what this weird nationalism in events like this could inspire. But it seemed fairly tame of what I saw. I just hate that shit. Like, people trying to project their worldview onto shit that has no connection to international relations whatsoever.
I love projecting my worldview onto that stuff. I'm a big fan of doing
fun.
that. Yeah.
You liked it with Cantor.
Yeah, exactly.
You liked it with Cantor in China.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was cheering on Iran to defeat the great Satan on the pitch, but couldn't get it done, unfortunately. But
I mean, I definitely thought to myself, it would be funny if Iran beats the U.S. and knocks them out. Like, that would be funny. But I don't know. It's like a little homerism in me. I was like, okay, yeah, it's good for them. I got excited when he scored. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like we talked about a couple weeks ago with Tom Williams. Just, these are just people who were born in the same place or live in the same place who like the same sport. It has nothing to do with mostly anything else. The real problem is just FIFA itself and and how they selected the host country and all the problems there with treatment of fans and working conditions for people who built these stadiums. That's the real problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the fact that we haven't figured out a way to host a World Cup without displacing people, without hurting workers' living conditions is you're right. It's such an indictment of FIFA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's enough sports talk. We can save some for the intro because I know Rob's going to want to talk about the certain basketball game held on Monday night. But Matthew Cunningham-Cook, thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you here. You write for The Lever, where you have done amazing work over the past few weeks covering the battle between rail workers and their evil bosses with the government's involvement. But before we get to that, Matthew, we have a very serious question. And we ask everybody on this show the same question so we know who we're dealing with and whether or not this interview should even continue. Matthew, are you a gamer?
I am not.
Not at all.
No.
All right.
I played Mac games as a kid, and that was the full extent of it. So if you want to
That's
talk
like an
about,
anti-gamer. That's if you're...
Yeah, if you want to talk about Ambrosia software games from 1999, I can rap with you guys about that. But anything more advanced, I have no knowledge whatsoever.
Okay, well, let's scratch the next 20 minutes of discourse that we were planning on.
Like, what were you talking about? Like escape velocity or what?
Yeah, escape velocity override. Me and my brother and my sister all played those. Bubble Trouble, that was a popular one with my sister.
Trouble, okay. Amazing. Nice. So there's not even like just even an inkling within you where you're
any
just
analog games, board games, that kind of
curious.
stuff, that counts as well.
Board games. I mean, again, as a younger person, for sure. But I'm a pretty boring guy when it comes to anything fun.
Our listeners are going to revolt over this. They're just going to be
they're gonna be furious.
I mean, Jordan
really
and
pissed off.
I mean, yeah, and I'm even more. I mean, Jordan and I bonded at the Lever Company retreat because we were the two non-drinkers, which makes me even more boring. Basically, a joint every now and again is the only vice I have.
I won't say who, but I loved that, like, somebody who I least expected just whipped out like a bag of edibles. Just like, this is the fun bag. It's like, just thinking to myself, like, of all people, I did not have you pegged for this person. And I'm just watching and taking it all in. It was nice. But that's okay. We'll give you a pass.
Okay. Yes, I apologize.
It's all right.
Yes.
I'm still kind of mulling that over. I'm not fully ready to. But
I did work for CWA, which is organizing video game workers. But that happened after I left. So that's probably my closest connection.
I think you get grandfathered in.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll give you. Yeah.
I mean, very
Gamer
necessary.
Valor that
It's
way.
certainly an industry that workers need more representation and need more
Jesus
solidarity.
Christ, yeah.
Yeah, and well, it's both where workers are pissed off and exploited, and also tends to be owned by companies like Microsoft that have all these government contracts and these antitrust issues and things like that, and also not like a heinously anti-union leadership, like Amazon. So there's a lot of, certainly CWA sees a lot of potential there, and there's they came to an organizing agreement with Activision Blizzard, but we'll see kind of how robust that organizing agreement is, because lots of times companies will agree to organizing agreements with unions and then back off from them fairly quickly.
And the amount of profit that those AAA games make too is just like astronomical.
Yeah.
Compared to the working conditions and the compensation for the people that are doing the work and doing the programming and the design and all the little stuff that needs to happen to create these games, the discrepancy there is so massive.
Yeah. Working conditions too, in terms of just obscenely long hours. It's and I mean, it's I think it's like any other industry, but for whatever reason, I think the folks who work on video games see themselves as more proletarianized than other tech workers. And I wouldn't say that I'm kind of the expert on why exactly that is. You guys would probably know better than me, but I do think that's fascinating, is that basically the only two concrete ways into tech worker organizing have been either through video game workers or the other kind of big group is, tech workers who work at media companies. So kind of people following the journalism union wave.
Yeah. Well, I went to a panel at Netroots where some of these workers who have been pushing for unions at these big companies spoke. And someone had previously worked at Activision Blizzard, and I'm sure you both are familiar with just like beyond just the treatment of workers, like the rampant culture of sexual harassment and abuse there that employees brought to light over the past couple of years. But beyond that, they were talking about, on the working conditions point, like Matthew mentioned, something I had never considered is with this push for augmented reality and virtual reality through these headsets, people need to test all this stuff. And they have people testing these products for and games on these products for several hours a day straight, when their own warning labels for consumers encourages you to limit it at 30 minutes at a time. But they want these people who are working there to be in these headsets for 5, 6, 7 hours straight. which is just like unbelievably unhealthy, and I can't imagine like comfortable. Like I would beyond just getting dizzy, I'd get sick and feel miserable, and just like the psychological effects that would have, just shutting yourself out from like contact for that long at a time. It's just really deeply unhealthy. And this culture of like grind and crunch in the run up to the distribution of these games, which ultimately they just end up releasing digital patches and expansions for later on, seems totally unnecessary and driven by a totally unchecked greed. And then they're all like merging, so like it also presents like antitrust issues. They're all like acquiring one another and like merging into these giant, like consolidating really just into like Sony and Microsoft and like a couple other big ones. But just like it's really, really alarming that I think a lot of people disregard just because it's video games, so they don't treat it as the same type of like worker issue as, say, like a railroad or I don't know, just any other type of like construction union or electrical workers or anything like that. I think it's just because of the product itself and how it has for years been seen as something like sophomoric and childish. People just don't take it seriously, and they should, because it's a colossal industry with billions and billions of profit for these companies every year.
Yeah, and it's a huge threat, to all of the Hollywood unions as well. So, there's actors on video games, there's, set designers on video games, there's, animators on video games. All these types of professions that, if you're in Hollywood, are unionized with strong wages and benefits packages that are, being undercut by the video game industry.
And that's exactly why in Hollywood, in the kind of like Marvel assembly line form of filmmaking, they're filming everything on green screen rather than on actual sets, so they can outsource that to like a non-unionized animators in South Korea or elsewhere, right? So they don't have to go down that road.
The fascinating thing is a bunch of the South Korean animators are actually stalking horses for North Korean companies, is something that I have heard. That a bunch of the animation work in South Korea is actually subcontracted to state-owned North Korean firms, and apparently at some points it's been a significant portion of the hard currency, or the U.S. dollars or euros that North Korea has been able to access. These are all just rumors I've heard. This is not reporting right here, but I find that
Kim
very
family
fascinating.
gets one over on Uncle Sam yet again.
Yes.
A movie I watched recently that was just like kind of wild to revisit, The Interview.
It is wild to it's amazing that got made in retrospect, isn't it?
Yeah. It feels weird watching it now.
Well, Seth Rogen admits that there was, I don't know if he explicitly said CIA involvement in the film, but I think he mentioned spooks at one point or something like that. And he was like, yeah, it was different than getting any other movie approved. It was like, I just had this idea, and then it was like everything was greenlit without any editing or critical feedback whatsoever. It's like, okay.
Wow.
I think more foreign like filmmaking companies should release films just gleefully laughing about blowing up American political leaders as well. I'm sure America would react to that totally normally, and they'd be totally okay with it, totally fine with it.
It was just like the international event that movie triggered too. Like, I think just like watching that with the historical context and understanding of like what came after, I think it was ultimately released on like YouTube for free or something, because they had to pull the theatrical release after the hack, and then like Sony didn't want it, and then another studio picked it up, and I think they released it digitally. But I was just like thinking back as I was watching it, just like, and for some reason my partner and I had been on like a Seth Rogen like stoner movie kick over the past couple of weeks. So we watched like This Is the End and Pineapple Express, and then finished with that one. It was just like, this was just like a couple like goofy guys just trying to fuck around and have fun. They ended up creating this like international incident on accident, with that hack too, which was just like, I think toppled the studio head.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, Alex Coburn, the former Nation columnist who died a decade ago, he said that Ian Fleming caused the Cold War because of James Bond. And I wonder if the interview is basically the genesis to North Korea, sextubbling down on their nuclear program.
Well, I think that's a theory we can adopt and just start espousing. I like it.
I mean, the U.S. military also parking right on their border and aiming nukes at them for the last 70 years is also probably something to do with it
for sure.
as well.
That's just called self-defense. We're defending ourselves.
Well, that's too materialist an analysis for me, Rob.
None of that here. Come on.
Oh, man. But speaking of working conditions, that is something that has been in the... Yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
It's something that's been in the news this week, and for the past couple of weeks, but definitely more this week, as the battle and struggle between rail workers and their unions and the evil bosses, these railroad barons, has come to a head, and Biden and congressional leaders are desperately trying to avoid a strike after these unions rejected this deal that was brokered without their involvement, and the workers' involvement specifically. And Matthew, you've done some great reporting at The Lever about this. How did we get to this point? So we now have Congress trying to pass a bill to broker a deal, and some of the issues that workers have raised is they don't have paid sick time and they need it, and their ask of 7 days, which is pretty tame compared to other employers' sick day policy, was met with opposition from some folks in Congress. Shocker. Matthew, how did we get here and what's going on?
I mean, it really kind of goes back to, I think, a Faustian bargain that some of the more conservative unions agreed to over 90 years ago with the Railway Labor Act, where it was passed when Republicans controlled both houses of Congress and the White House. It was in response to a massive strike wave of workers that had been going on for over 30 years. But it placed a bunch of really significant restrictions on the ability of unions and workers to exercise their rights on the job, in particular, their right to strike. And when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, for whatever reason, it didn't include railway workers. And so they've been stuck with this legislation that, while it contains some elements that you could construe as more positive for workers than the NLRA, on the whole is really about cracking down on workers' right of expression under the First Amendment, which is kind of what the lefty radical approach to analyzing New Deal labor reforms is like. This is an extension of First Amendment rights. This isn't, even though it's explicitly couched in the NLRA as about, regulation of commerce because strikes are unfortunate. Really, the NLRA couched the right to strike into law for the first time, and workers under the NLRA can strike at any time, Unions voluntarily enter into no strike agreements that prevent workers from striking at different times, unions in the private sector. But if you don't have a contract, you can strike at any time under the NLRA. That's not true with the Railway Labor Act. Workers have been working without a contract for, I believe, 3 years right now. And it comes with, starting in the late 70s and mid 80s under Carter and Reagan, the deregulation of the railroad industry, which then led to this thing called precision scheduled railroading, which is really just like another word for what we've seen in basically every industry, whether it's nursing, whether it's fast food, whether it's teaching, whether it's, any major industry that you can speak of, which is, lean, as operating as close to the bone as possible with as little staff as possible. with having just-in-time models that ensure that workers are effectively on call for huge portions of their time. And it's part and parcel, I think, of the broader story, which is the selling out of the American worker over the last 50 years. That if you walk around our hollowed out towns and cities across this country, you'll see it. So I think that's the big picture background. More immediately is, so all that leads to a situation where workers get very little time off. There was Warren Buffett's BNSF, one of the largest railroads, introduced this draconian scheduling policy in February that basically leaves workers with no free time on their own. And it's really, it's interesting if you look on Twitter, kind of this is an industry that, let's be clear, is overwhelmingly male. So the guys who are advocating yes votes on these contracts, it's a significant portion. So, that's one of these stories. One of the things that buttresses Biden's very annoying arguments on this subject is that the three unions that rejected the contract did it by relatively close margins. There wasn't a situation where it was like 95% of the workers voted to reject it. And if you just look on social media, the workers who kind of supported are kind of into hustle culture, like they're, some of the guys I saw are into crypto or, investing, and they make good money, and so I kind of see this as, the railroad industry trying to institutionalize hustle culture into its railroad contracts, with the expense being workers' sense of self-regard, their ability to spend time with their families, their ability to go to the doctor, and their ability to, lead their own lives as they choose. Where we are now is there's three unions that have rejected the contract, and the Biden administration has asked Congress to shut down the strike and implement the agreement that was agreed to by union negotiators.
Whoa, though, because I'm not so sure about, because I'm sure that Joe Biden has said many times he's the most pro-labor president in history. So that doesn't sound like something he would do. Are you sure about this?
Yeah, what the fascinating thing about this that we reported is Joe Biden was one of just 6 senators, along with people like Paul Wellstone, who opposed the back-to-work order that Congress issued to the railroad unions in 1992. And again, this is kind of in the context of Joe Biden, being a senator who, effectively created the student debt crisis, who championed NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, who led the campaign for the bankruptcy bill. But on this issue, he was very good, and he explicitly couched his opposition to the back-to-work order because he rode Amtrak every day from Delaware to D.C. So it's certainly a big about face for the administration, but it comes in the face of the entirety of the business lobby effectively demanding that Congress do this. And so it's not just the railroad industry, it's the agricultural industry, it's the Chamber of Commerce, it's anybody dependent on railroads is interested in this back to work order, because I think they're acutely aware that given the critical role that railroad workers play in both domestic and global supply chains, that the workers would almost certainly kick the railroad's ass, very badly. It's very different from 30 years ago. The global supply chains are so much more brittle now than they were 3 decades ago. So even a 2-day strike would be totally disastrous for this industry, materially affecting profit margins, not just for railroads, but again, across industry as a whole. And capital doesn't like that.
Yeah, well, that's the amazing thing about some of these arguments coming from the Biden administration and other prominent people in the U.S. government, the media, saying like, well, of course, we're so pro-union and so pro-labor, and normally I would support strikes, but reluctantly, we've got to make sure we legislate this one to shut it down because it would be so disruptive to the economy. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the point. That's the point, is that it is disruptive to the economy. The fact that these striking workers, even like you're describing, like even if striking for a couple of days would lead to such massive consequences for these powerful capitalist interests, that kind of indicates that these are extremely essential workers that should probably just be paid what they're being asked for and given the sick days that they're being asked for. And they're using this excuse that, it's going to have these negative economic consequences as the reason why they must legislate them back to work. And it's like, that's the whole purpose of labor organizing and union activity like this, which is that, we do have the power to disrupt the economy. And if you don't give us what we want, that's what we're going to do. And it's remarkable that they're kind of trying to make this argument about it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, like, even if their main concern was from a business perspective, then you would have to think that there would be more discussion about brittle supply chains and how we make them more dynamic and resilient. And, that's not happening either. So really what they're saying is like, yes, public policy enacted by both parties in Congress have made supply chains as brittle as they are. And the moment that workers start to raise that as a significant issue and exercise their power in those brittle supply chains, we're just going to shut them down. And
I really want to stress that this comes at a time where some of these railroads are experiencing record profits. In 2021, the railroad that Warren Buffett controls had a record earnings of $6 billion, and his net worth jumped 50% during the pandemic to $100 billion. And this is a guy who people praise as, the altruistic billionaire, like the good billionaire, because he's talked about the importance of people with that much wealth giving back. And a lot of, you could, if you really wanted to dig into it, a lot of what the wealthy does to, quote, give, is just move money into foundations or trusts and avoid taxes, with some, charitable donations that get their name on things here and there. And in a letter to, or in his defense of their profits, he explicitly or argued that workers were not contributing to these skyrocketing profits. And, the CEOs you wrote in September, the CEOs of railroad companies were paid over $200 million. And these workers have not asked for much relative to what they do and what they put in, and even the benefits packages that other industries and other companies have. One of their asks is for sick time. Could you talk about Warren Buffett's involvement in all this? I know you have some thoughts on him as a person and his people's perception of him as a good billionaire, and also just what they're asking for, and explain to folks listening why it's not an unreasonable demand, why it shouldn't be met with this kind of opposition.
Yeah, I mean, what's clear is that the contracts would have been ratified if there had even been 3 paid sick days on the table, because the ratification votes were so close. Right now, it's 1 paid sick day that you have to give 48 hours advance for in the contract. So, given how close the votes were, really would have been like 2 more additional days. And yeah, they refused to do it. And I don't think you can underestimate Warren Buffett's role as kind of a coordinator of capitalist opinion on this, because he's the biggest player in the room. My favorite anecdote about Warren Buffett is that, in every profile of him, it's like, oh, he lives in his same quaint house in Omaha, Nebraska. And then the reporter, invariably pro-Buffett, will then be like, the only luxury he affords himself is a private jet. And I'm like, that...
Amazing.
To me, I think that just underscores everything wrong with the press's coverage of Warren Buffett is... private jets are extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily taxing on the environment, and we have no idea how often he uses it. He probably uses it all the damn time. I think the other thing that's really worth noting about Warren Buffett is he's explicitly said that his and Berkshire Hathaway's strategy is to invest in monopolies. He's like, I like moats around my business. That means that you dislike entrepreneurship. You don't want anybody doing anything interesting.
That's that free market we hear so much about.
Yeah, you're basically saying, I want, socialism for me, Warren Buffett. And that creates, so we actually covered another, the connection that we should probably be more explicit about now that I'm thinking about it is, there's actually a real connection between the railroad workers on one hand and the Jackson water crisis on the other hand, which we've also covered at The Lever, where Berkshire Hathaway is the largest shareholder in Moody's Investor Service, the main bond credit rating agency. And so what we reported in, I believe in October, is when we reported this, is that, Moody's, basically because they're a bunch of racists who hate working class people and poor people, has artificially lowered Jackson's credit rating repeatedly, even as the fundamentals of the city have improved under a mayor, Lumumba, who is not totally corrupt, or not corrupt at all. Let's be clear, unlike his successor, who was totally corrupt. And so yeah, that's, Warren Buffett is frank. He's like, I invest in Moody's because they're an oligopoly. There's only 3 credit rating agencies that are certified by the federal government as nationally recognized statistical rating organizations, and I get to be a major shareholder in one of them. And the fascinating thing is, while Moody's is downgrading Jackson's credit rating, preventing their ability to invest in their own water infrastructure and increasing the debt service payments that they have to pay to Wall Street, his own companies, basically get a Buffett bonus, from Moody's. And so this has been borne out by academic research and also by the European Competition Authority, I believe, which fined Berkshire Hathaway a few million. It was a slap on the wrist, but it was very helpful for those of us who hate Warren Buffett to point to that regulators have found that Moody's artificially inflates the ratings of his companies. And then they also will selectively apply their ratings methodologies and not look at some real dangers under the hood. So, I think, person looking at BNSF would be concerned about its rapidly aging workforce, about its employee morale, about its levels of turnover, about the workers leaving the railroad. That should be a concern for Moody's, but of course it's not. And why is it not? Because Warren Buffett is Moody's largest shareholder. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it underscores, this octopus-like stranglehold that the Oracle of Omaha has on our economy as a whole, and how unwilling both the press and, most politicians are to call him out on this and talk about breaking up Berkshire Hathaway. We talk about breaking up big tech, breaking up Wall Street. I say, let's break up Berkshire Hathaway.
Hell yeah.
Well, the good thing about those rating agencies, as we saw during the financial collapse, is this is really just their opinions. And they would never give inflated ratings to something they ultimately knew was just full of shit. So this is just their free speech at work.
Yeah. Yep.
This has never come back to blow up in anyone's face in the past, so should be fine.
Yeah.
No, but I wanted to draw the distinction as well between, you talked about the way that the media talks about Warren Buffett and other billionaires like him. Famously, just recently, like with Sam Bankman-Fried, the whole altruistic billionaire thing they're trying to do that with him before his whole persona and his whole business model was exposed as being totally fraudulent. But not only do they talk about these billionaires like this, but to go back to this rail strike in particular, it's been really interesting seeing corporate media talk about that and frame the strike in these very anti-worker ways as well. Just as always, as when it ever comes to these kinds of like labor activities, taking like fear mongering about the idea of a strike. Oh, and the terrible economic consequences. The holidays are around the corner. This could be, have these devastating impacts on the economy, inflation, and using all these kind of like scary words to describe this, and taking all the responsibility for that and putting it on the workers and saying like, are you sure you want to strike? I mean, we're these greedy workers are to want to strike and they want to cause all these terrible problems, and never ever making the case that it's the railway bosses and the people that are, have the ability to give these workers what they're asking for, the very meager demands that they're asking for, and never making the case that they should just be paid what they deserve or given the benefits that they deserve, and always taking the responsibility for the strike and whatever negative consequences they're fear-mongering about and putting it on the backs of the workers.
Yeah, I mean, the media, I think that there's a reason why journalism is the least economically diverse profession. I grew up in a household with, both parents college-educated professionals, and I can guarantee to you that I'm in the bottom quintile of household income, for the average journalist. And that has real ongoing effects, I think, on the way that press coverage happens, is that people don't know workers. People meaning journalists. People in media don't know workers. They don't talk to workers. They don't respect workers. They don't see workers. They don't view workers as human. And I think this applies to not just the railroad workers, but frankly, every industry subject. I think that this is a particularly kind of good example because, frankly, the stronger the unions are, the more critical the workers are in a supply chain, the more angry the media will be about them trying to exercise their rights. But I think it's, there's both these perverse incentives where you have a massive media monopoly that, basically dictates kind of official coverage of basically everything on the one hand. And then you have a population of journalists who really have very little connections to the way that the vast majority of Americans live and experience life. I think this is it's a huge, ongoing, enduring problem. And yeah, I think you describe it very well, Rob.
Yeah, well, that's something that's fascinating to me is the way that people in our media class, people in our political class, love to lecture other countries about this precious press freedom that they care so much about, whether it's China or whether it's Cuba or Nicaragua or Venezuela or what have you, even though there is a powerful press oligarchs in Venezuela as well. But that's the thing, is that as much as we love to lecture other countries about press freedom, someone did once say that, press in these capitalist countries, it produces a capitalist press, which leads to a corrupt press. When our media is owned by these powerful oligarchic business interests, they're always going to be presenting news in that kind of slant and with that bias, which is exactly why we are, on the fringes of things, like here on this podcast or with the work that you do at The Lever, we're trying to chip away at that, but we'll never have the same level of penetration and platform that these powerful corporate media establishments do. And they're always going to frame these issues in this way, while simultaneously, again, lecturing other countries about how wonderful our free press is.
Yeah, every Murdoch-owned paper across the world supported the Iraq War.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we allow an Australian sociopath to control the media discourse of the United States, an entirely different country. And that's, that's what it's Rupert Murdoch's world. We're just living in it.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? There's some movement in Congress. People like Cornyn initially said, he could see some Republican support for the progressive push for more sick time for these workers. Rubio also said that the workers' interests should come first. The House passed their version today, now goes to the Senate. Cornyn walked back his initial support for this paid sick time for rail workers. I would imagine Rubio's going to follow suit once they get a couple calls from some of their corporate donors, because that's ultimately who is pushing against this, again, very, very modest request. So what do you think is going to happen in the Senate? And do you think this progressive push to guarantee paid sick time for workers will be successful, Matthew?
I really don't know. I mean, it's, it does kind of feel like a Lucy with the football situation,
Yeah. Surely the Senate will pass this.
Yeah, right. I think they are, the one positive, I think, from all of this is that they're going to be back at the bargaining table very quickly. My suggestion to the unions is that there are a bunch of strategies that you can take kind of without going on strike. But it requires coordination across unions. There's 14 different unions, and then the smaller ones tend to be the most, critical, certainly in terms of, like a railway signalman, has a lot more ability to shut down or slow down things than other groups of workers like conductors or engineers. That's kind of my feeling, is that the fight continues. This group, Railroad Workers United, is amazing because they're trying to bring workers across crafts. That would be my suggestion to the workers after this, if the contract is voted through, is you guys have to figure out a way for you guys all to be in one union, which with this new leadership of the Teamsters might actually be possible. It's like, let's see some consolidation. It seems like it would make sense to have all the rail workers in the Teamsters. And that would certainly help to have a more coordinated and effective approach next time at the bargaining table. It's depressing, that probably the most likely thing is just that this contract gets put through, but labor has swung back from much, much, much more significant defeats in the past, and the biggest and most important thing, I think, is for the unions to have an open assessment of what went right and what went wrong in this bargaining campaign and what could go differently the next time. And that requires kind of drawing on the common and collective experience, sophistication, and knowledge of the tens of thousands of rank-and-file workers who exercised their democratic rights to vote against this contract.
So what if this passes? They don't have some of these provisions that workers are asking for. This passes in Congress, and that's just kind of like issued to them by decree. Is there a potential for like a wildcat strike? Like, do you think, is there anything they can do if, things like paid sick time aren't included?
Wildcat strikes are really difficult. It's not, a wildcat strike where there isn't a union is much easier, actually. So if there is a wildcat strike, the judges will start fining the unions. Prosecutors might put labor leaders in jail. There, will almost certainly be workers fired. It's a huge, very dangerous, volatile step to take. Now, I would never tell workers to not go on strike if that's what the decision they come to. But the other thing is, you really you want to have as much unanimity as possible, and when I believe the biggest margin against the contract was 57 to 43, you have to wonder if those those 43% of workers who voted in favor of the contract in that one particular union, but in other, I mean, there was, many other unions that voted to ratify the contract. And then, so that's the other thing is that, in a wildcat strike, there's no requirement right now under the terms of membership of being in a rail union. You have to honor picket lines. This is picket lines of other rail unions. This is a requirement of membership of being in a rail union. So if you cross a picket line that another rail union has set up, you are liable to be put up on disciplinary charges inside of your union, be expelled from the union, and as a result forced to resign your job in the railroad industry. That does not apply in the case of a wildcat strike. So, of course, I mean, any strike will, given the fact that supply chains are so brittle, will really disrupt things, but it really does put a group of workers at risk. It would almost certainly be divisive at this time, and there's a very high likelihood that there would be some very significant negative consequences. All of this underscores, I think, just how tilted labor law is in the U.S. toward the bosses. On the one hand, and two, I think just the residual effects of the crushing of the labor movement in manufacturing. The United Auto Workers represented over 2 million workers in 1980, and it's now down to 400,000, 500,000.
Wow.
And that's in auto. They represented 2 million workers in manufacturing, and they're under 500,000 in manufacturing. It's a better way of saying it. The Teamsters as well has seen similar precipitous declines that they've only made up for by new organizing in healthcare and the public sector. And my own former employer, CWA, very similar. The breakup of the Bell system in the mid-'80s led to hundreds of thousands of layoffs. And what that means is that Congress is just much more likely to do whatever they want because so many fewer workers, particularly in the private sector, are in unions. And I think that's, to end on a more hopeful note, I mean, that's what's so exciting about the Amazon and Starbucks and Trader Joe's unionizing is that's really kind of what all workers and railroad workers in particular really need to address this. We need more workers in unions because that's the only way we're going to upset this really aggressively anti-worker power dynamic that we see in the U.S. today.
Yeah, I mean, it's you point out this massive drop in worker power and union activity and the offshoring of manufacturing. That's kind of the amazing thing is that as people in the United States government have willingly handed over the whole entirety of this massive manufacturing industry to China and to other nations in the developing world through deals like NAFTA that Joe Biden himself gleefully supported when it was popular, and now they're kind of starting to realize how they're losing on this global stage in no longer being the sort of top trading partner for the rest of the world. And they're sort of getting to the idea or starting to talk about wanting to reshore manufacturing, but it's like they're at this massive deficit because they willingly handed over the entire manufacturing industry for essentially in order to disrupt this kind of activity, so these powerful capitalist interests wouldn't have to pay their workers and a living wage and give them all these benefits that unions had fought for over the years. So it's kind of funny now seeing them scramble to try and square that circle when they're the ones that created the problem in the first place.
Yeah, I know. It's a huge quandary.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is a quandary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, just circling back to the media component is, it's like spend some time in, like a Waffle House anywhere, and you'll see the effects of these policies. on ordinary people and how destructive it's been, and how it's gutted and devastated entire communities. And, instead, when reporters enter these communities, it's to say that it's, that the only thing going on here is, some type of racial or cultural backlash, which is a component, to be sure. That is a component, but it's not the main story. The main story is that these communities have been destroyed. That's the story.
Well, and I even saw someone talking about these rail workers being like, well, anecdotally, these rail workers are very Trumpy. And it's like, yeah, why have these workers moved away from the liberal establishment of the Democratic Party? It's just a total mystery, as they're literally trying to legislate them back to work and not taking their side in yet another kind of labor dispute. Wow, I can't believe that these workers are abandoning the Democratic Party in droves. How could this have happened? We're all looking for the guy who did this.
Every Democratic presidential candidate in the 1960 primaries launched their campaigns at the Labor Day march in Detroit in 1959. Every single one of them, or every major one. I can't say it. And it's like, imagine that happening today.
Yeah. Yep. Well, no, I think you did leave us on a positive note, though, which is new for this program. So, Jordan, do you have anything else?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for joining us, Matthew, and wanted to ask you to plug your work, where people can find you and your reporting.
Yeah, I'm a reporter at The Lever, this online investigative news outlet, and you can find us at levernews.com.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to The Insurgents. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify or at Substack, theinsurgents.substack.com. You'll get the latest episodes delivered straight to your inbox, as well as our newsletter. On Twitter, we are at InsurgentsPod. Tweet at us, harass Ken in our replies, and then send us your hate mail to theinsurgentspod@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening.